Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Express webinar series, Achieving Organizational Agility with Scrum at Scale, a bi-weekly series of short webinars, 30 minutes or less, that feature Scrum at Scale experts who share insights on how to apply the Scrum at Scale framework to attain organization-wide agility. Each webinar in this series focuses on a unique topic of interest regarding Scrum at Scale. My name personally is Alyssa Layden, and I recently joined the Scrum at Scale team as the digital marketing strategist, and I will be hosting today's webinar and moderating questions as we go. As a registrant of this webinar series, we will keep you up to date on future presentations via email, and you can also find the list of upcoming events on our website at scrumatscale.com/events. As many of you may be aware, Scrum at Scale is the natural extension of the core Scrum framework. It was created by the co-creator of Scrum, Dr. Jeff Sutherland, and it has successfully transformed the way that work is done across many industries and domains. To learn more about where it is being implemented, check out our growing library of case studies available on demand on our website. And just before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to briefly cover just a few housekeeping items. First, to provide you with the best listening experience, all audio lines, except for the host and the presenter, will be muted during this webinar. If you have a question at any time, we encourage you to ask them through the Q&A panel on your console, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible as we go along. The chat feature will also be available, as some of you guys have noticed, to share comments with other webinar attendees. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to play on demand on both the Scrum at Scale website and on our YouTube channel. Our follow-up email will include a link to the recording and the presentation slides. I'd also like to quickly mention that these webinars are eligible for SEU credits from Scrum Alliance, and you will need to view at least 2 webinars for each credit. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Kim Antelo. Kim has a proven expertise in delivering solutions by leveraging Scrum, Agile, and Lean methodologies. He is detail-oriented, possesses great communication skills, and has consistently adopted innovative approaches to solving complex problems throughout her career. She is currently one of the principal consultants at Scrum Inc., and she also leads the Train the Trainer program that our Scrum at Scale trainers go through to become certified. I'd like to welcome you, Kim, and thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm kind of sad that this is the first time that I've been able to do one of these, but Scrum at Scale is keeping us quite busy as we're going and transforming a number of different organizations. So just a couple of quick things about Scrum at Scale and who we are, just to make sure that everyone is aware. There's a picture there of me with Dr. Sutherland, and this is a joint venture between the Scrum Alliance and Scrum Inc. Just a little bit more about me. I've done a lot in highly regulated industries, but I am really a product owner at heart. So as we said, thinking about how do we solve those really simple problems or those really complex problems in the most simple ways possible. I wanted to just kind of get started. We're talking about how do we actually change the culture within organizations. And I wanted to take this directly from Simon's presentation that he did in the last webinar. The very first rule of scaling is don't. Wherever you possibly can, try to reduce the number of people and the number of teams that you actually need in order to deliver really great results. That's going to be the easiest thing that we need to do, which is always interesting because from a culture or even a corporate perspective, we fall into this trap of, oh, this is really big, we need more and more teams. And we actually know that we want to create that reference model first, understand what's going on in the organization. And oftentimes those things will allow us to identify some of the larger cultural impediments that we may run into. So the first thing is, don't scale, actually reduce the number of teams that you have. So as we're talking about implementing Scrum at Scale, we know that from the State of Agile report that the biggest reasons why teams have problems with actually adopting Agile, whether it's at the team level or even scaling, are these 2 things that are up at the top. So organizational culture is at odds with the Agile values. And then the next one being that general organization resistance to change. So we've got to figure out how can we meet people where they are and understand how can we actually impact the culture of our organization. There's this wonderful quote that says that if you're trying to attempt to change an organization's culture, you're going to fail. We really need to figure out how do you actually change the system that they're a part of. So people's behaviors are a product of that symptom. So we're going to talk about how Scrum at Scale allows you to do that. So in order to change the culture, we need to change the system. And in order to change the system, we often need to change the structure. So there's this wonderful quote that many people use, and it is, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And oftentimes as a Scrum Master or as an Agile coach, we've got to be brave. We have to be courageous, which is one of those Scrum values. But if you look at the actual quote or comment from Gandhi, it says, if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. You have to change your own nature and your attitude towards the world. We need not wait to see what others do. So we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of things that we can actually do to do that. So again, what are the things that we need to do to change the system and the structure? And we can use Scrum at Scale ourselves to be able to do that. And then how do we actually change how we're working? And we can change that in ways through Scrum at Scale, like understanding what are metrics that are good or bad, how are we bonusing people, how are we incentivizing people. So one of the first things that we often run into at organizations is that there is a culture of fear to speak. And so we've got a picture here of someone saying, "Hey, I can't say that." We've run into a number of organizations where people are afraid to raise impediments because they'll just get pushed back down to the team saying, "Hey, why didn't you fix that yourself?" Dave Slayton actually has a really great case study that is on our case study library, that talks about one of our clients and some issues that we've had there. But not only thinking about those smaller impediments and how do we unlock the things that the teams are going through, but as Scrum Masters, as Agile coaches, what can we do to challenge the culture and the system and the structure of our organization? So again, we've got to be a little bit courageous, or a lot bit courageous, and be able to step out and say, is this a place that I want to work, and am I willing to kind of put myself on the line to be able to address some of those things? So here is a redacted email that I sent at one organization when we were leading the Agile transformation. So just a couple of things. This was an email that was sent to the CIO of that organization. And a lot of people told me, "Hey, Kim, if you send this communication, you'll get fired." So I won't read the whole thing, but after going through 3 different continents and training across the world, I had a bit of a different perspective than most of the people at that organization. Hearing about how could we actually implement Agile and what were some of the cultural issues within that organization, there were 3 big things that came up. So the ability of people to be able to say no, where leaders were just constantly accepting additional work. So that is often a big thing. And that's why I love Henrik's video on the product owner in a nutshell. And people always laugh when he says they've got to be able to say no. So we've really got to make sure that as teams that we're working on the right stuff and we're not just trying to please everyone, which in reality pleases no one. So that also falls into limiting the priorities and making sure that we're focusing on what are we actually working on, and not just throwing in a bunch of surprises, or as I like to say, ankle biters as the teams are doing the work. And then telling the truth. So being able to have a conversation with the leaders about what's actually going on in the organization and how do we empower and inspire our teams to actually be able to do really great work. So here's just an email that I actually sent to the CIO and the leadership team at a pretty large organization. And the good thing was I didn't get fired. it would have been okay if I was fired, but he actually said we're actually starting to make changes within the culture and the organization because we do have the ability to speak these things and make sure that we're addressing it. And they said, hey, let's go and start to attack these things and work with our HR departments. Jeff talks a lot about some of the things that you just heard about or saw in that email specifically, but in that story. So he talks about the OODA Loop. So as we're acting and we're thinking about how do we go about attacking some of the issues that we have within an organization, whether it's people are being command and control, people are afraid to speak out, people are being incentivized to work as specialists instead of work on teams, we as a transformation team, as an Agile practice, as a Scrum Master, need to think about with our actions, what's going to happen with that. So observe what's happening within those different things that are taking place as we're applying these actions. Reorient ourselves and see, is this tactic going to work? Decide what we're going to do and then continue to act. Jeff talks a lot about the OODA Loop. And this isn't a new concept. It's something that he's built the Scrum framework on and has been the basis of it for a very long time. So we've got to think about how do we get within that decision loop of the people who are maybe not necessarily for us doing an Agile transformation or implementing Scrum at scale, and figuring out how do we meet people where they are? How do we understand what's driving that behavior? And then how do we actually decide what we're going to do to counteract those things and then actually make an action and do something about it? I had a leader who was in a supply chain organization, and I really felt like they were going to be the biggest problem that we had with implementing Scrum at scale. And after we were able to understand what were the things that were actually going into the reasons why they were maybe not on board, we were able to figure out how can we actually appeal to their wants and needs and to address their specific issues and act on that. And they were able to become one of the biggest advocates of us moving to Scrum at scale. It looks like there is a question. It says the subject of the webinar is how to change culture within the organization. So that's what we're talking about. It's listening to the people and the teams who are going through this change and then being able to attack that. And some of the other things that we can do here with this OODA loop, and Scrum at scale specifically, we don't just talk about, there's an executive action team and they're responsible for doing all of the work. It's also having an Agile practice who is a volunteer army of people who are there to understand what's really going on in the organization and not even just necessarily listening to the Scrum Masters who are raising impediments. But having an empowered Agile practice who has the ability to hear what's going on in the ground, being able to see what some of those impediments are, and then actively go about addressing them. Speaking of Agile practices, I had a group where we had a very active Agile practice. And we had people from various places within the organizations, not just Scrum Masters, but people who were developers, people who were in compliance, and people who did the real work. And so they were really interested in making this transformation real. So we had basically a Scrum team that were working as the Agile practice, and they decided what it was that we were going to do to actually address some of these culture issues. So, for example, we created a number of communication pathways. We made it so that things did not have to go through a communications person. So many teams have Slack or they have Yammer or other tools that you have the ability to communicate. And instead of it just coming out of Kim being the transformation leader or people who were on the Agile practice, we were working with those people to empower and enable other people to tell their stories. We were also creating that communication change and allowing people to, share their stories of what failed and what didn't, what failed and what worked very well. So creating that agile practice, if you have a larger organization, being able to understand what's really going on and not just relying on those impediments, but kind of coming at it from a couple of different places. So here you've got the observe and orient, making sure that you're observing from a number of different points of view, and then able to reach out and attack those things. So the Agile practice themselves will hopefully have their own backlog that they're working on, and that they're understanding what's going on in the organization. We're prioritizing those things, and we're allowing the Agile practice to actually go and work against that backlog. And we're giving them the support that they need. And hopefully we're providing an environment that will allow them to do that. So value-driven culture is essential, or using the framework of Scrum is extremely important and essential. So if we think about empiricism, which are the pillars that Scrum has been built on, so transparency, inspecting, and adapting, we need to make sure that we have an environment that also aligns with those Scrum values. So transparency, in order for us to create an environment that's going to be transparent, so we've got openness on the right side here. But in some cases, we have to know that that data or that information will be treated, respectfully, and that we're actually going to focus on what are the problems within the system, and not necessarily saying, hey, it's this person who has this specific problem. So transparency is definitely something that we need to look at. Even in large organizations, saying how do we take out the need to know idea and instead start to open these things up. That's something that I think is really awesome that comes out of Measure What Matters, which is a book from John Doerr. And at organizations, even like Google, they're opening up all of the objectives and key results and sharing all of that information across the organization, so that teams across the organization can see, who can I go to for help? How can I, really make a difference? And how can I find out what teams I'm going to work with? So transparency is important, because without that transparency, we don't have the ability to inspect. If I didn't have the transparency or the ability to actually get feedback when I was going across the world and training people, we wouldn't be able to inspect what are all of those themes and those different things that are happening, so that we actually had the ability to adapt. And then, of course, through building that, we really need to focus on those values that are on the right side of the slide. So having that transparency and the openness, making sure that we're having respectful conversations, then having the courage to have those respectful conversations. So I really feel like those top three items really build on themselves a lot. They're very generative. So if I have courage, I can be more courageous. If I know that people are going to be respectful, I also need to be open with the information that I have and make sure that we're sharing that appropriately. And then the other two things are focus and commitment. So being able to focus on what are we actually trying to achieve, and focusing on like the next most important thing, instead of kind of spreading ourselves all across, the entire transformation. That's what I really like about the Scrum at Scale framework. It's that it is more of a build your own framework. And that we have the ability to say, what are the biggest problems that we have within our organization, and how do we focus on that and then commit to start to solving those problems. So that's just a lot about the kind of values and then the pillars that come from Scrum and then Scrum at Scale, and how do we actually take those. So to change the culture, top down or bottom up, which approach should we actually take? And I will say that generally it's going to be a little bit of both. So, for example, I'm going to skip ahead here. I have a case study that you can go and learn more about on our case study library. From this perspective, we had a very top-down approach that was given to us. I was actually backpacking in Yosemite and found out hey, we're going to go and go all in on this. We were able to create an executive meta scrum, and they were having a meta scrum every single week. The way that this was top down was we knew that no one was going to get funding to work on any of their products or any of their projects without coming through this executive meta scrum. So very quickly it was, okay, that's top down. If we know that we're going to be able to deliver, products or projects, we're going to use this process. So implementing an executive meta scrum with people who are enabled and empowered, that will be a very important word, empowered to actually make decisions about what is the portfolio that we're working on, and having them start to listen to each other is extremely important. Having them build a mission of like, what is the actual problem that we're trying to attack, and then dynamically bringing those teams together that can be refactored very quickly will help us with actually achieving those results. So this is an example of the top down, where the leadership said, hey, you want to you want to work on anything, or you want to make your business partners happy, this is how we're going to do it. You're going to show us that every single 90 days, we're actually addressing, specific problems. They were doing release planning. They were focusing on what are the problems. They were focusing on what they were learning, and they were doing scaled reviews. So from this perspective, it wasn't everyone was on the same 90-day cadence, because there were so many groups and so many teams. Within a 90-day period, they were kind of cycling through and scheduling those things. From a bottoms-up perspective, that really goes into more of what I was talking about with the Agile practice. So we had people who were on the ground and at various levels of the organizations and different departments within the organization, who were telling us what's happening on the ground, how do we improve how the teams are working together. And so where that kind of clashes is that kind of middle manager level. And so we have to figure out, again, going back to how are we incentivizing people? What are we doing to make it so that they understand that, they're not necessarily going to lose their jobs, and we understand what we're going to do with them. So we definitely need to understand where they are, meet them where they are, and then figure out what's the best use for them. In many cases, maybe they want to go back and do technical work. Maybe they want to move into some sort of role within product ownership. Maybe they're really good at growing people, and they could be a Scrum of Scrums Masters. So there are a number of different things that we can do with people who are kind of finding themselves in this interesting or awkward position, but it all comes back to individuals and interactions. How do we have conversations with the people to see where do they want to be and where do we go? So there's a question of change management techniques that are useful for our culture change. So I did not include that in this deck, but we can definitely talk about it. So we are kind of in the Q&A section. So I particularly like the John Kotter model with the eight leading changes steps. And then he added the 4 additional items like mind and heart and the diverse many over the few. So I like to use that model. And I also take that and then attach that to the Chip and Dan Heath model, which is Switch. So if you take a look at the 2 of those and then figure out, again, not just following a prescription, but maybe using that as your first plan, and then going into what makes the most sense for us within our organization. So I generally will take some sort of mixture between those 2, and then of course always going back and doing the OODA loop and saying, okay, what's going on? How do we need to reorient? And then decide and act. So those are the 2 models that I will generally use. There are definitely other models like ADKAR and others. I have just found the 2 models of leading change from John Kotter and Chip and Dan Heath's Switch to be the most helpful. So with that, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I know that we wanted to leave some time for Q&A. If there are any other questions. The screen print of the OODA Loop. Yes, you can definitely share the screen print of the OODA Loop with your teams. It is just this here. You can also learn a lot more about the OODA Loop if you just Google John Boyd and the OODA Loop. There's a lot of content on that. Definitely a lot more than 30 minutes worth of that. And it says, if I want to share a screen print of the OODA Loop with our team, what's the best one or two liner to describe it? So in the States, my best way of being able to describe this, especially to American football fans, is Peyton Manning. And that's because a lot of people understand or have even heard of the Omaha comment. So when we think Peyton Manning and we think Omaha, for those of you who aren't football fans, Peyton Manning is a quarterback, and he has only two Super Bowl rings. But he would get up and basically be ready to execute a play. And he would observe the defense on the other line, on the other side, so who are his competitors, and then he would say, hey, wait a second, the play that we're going to call, or that we've called, isn't necessarily going to work against this lineup. So he would get in their decision loop and very quickly be able to call an audible. So as an empowered product owner of the offense of the football team, knowing what the direction of the organization is and having, some power from the coaches who are on the sideline, he had the ability to actually change the call and make a decision on how to do that. So that's my favorite story about actually applying the OODA Loop that people in the States get and understand. I know that if you're not an American football fan or not in the United States, that could be a little bit more difficult to understand. Okay, going back to the Q&A. Does Jeff have a new book? Jeff does not necessarily have a new book, but JJ Sutherland does have a new book. So his new book comes out in October, and it is the Scrum Field Book, a masterclass on accelerating performance, getting results, and defining the future. So it is available on Amazon and Audible for pre-release or pre-order. It does come out on October the 1st. There are a number of my stories and transformations and how we've dealt with a number of things specifically in that book. And I'm really looking forward to listening to it as I've read through the book at various levels and various stages as he's used Scrum to actually implement or to write that book. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to in October. Okay. What else? Is there any link between the PDCA and the OODA Loop decisions? So PDCA is Plan, Do, Check, Act, and that's definitely a lean concept, and the OODA Loop. So the OODA Loop actually came from I would say the Air Force. I think it was the Air Force, but it comes from jet fighter pilots. And John Boyd is a fighter pilot, or was a fighter pilot. And so doing some of those things definitely helped him. And they are very much so linked. They're very similar. So they're pretty much in alignment. But just a different perspective on it, and actually understanding where am I, what's going on, and then how do I decide and act from there. Okay, I think we're at our time box.
Yes, we are.
A lot of talking, so sorry about that. I was trying to include some of the comments and questions.
No, you did great. Thank you so much. And like you said, we are at the end of our time box for today's event. But if you guys want to learn more about Scrum at Scale, one of the best ways to do so is to take a certified Scrum at Scale practitioner class. And classes are available all across the globe, and you can find a class near you by visiting our website. And I just want to say this one more time. We did get a couple of questions on this. A video recording of today's presentation and the slides, they will be available via email and on our website within 24 hours. And I'd like to thank you, Kim, once again for taking the time to share your insights, and thank you guys for participating. This concludes today's webinar, and have a great day.